This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 199 of a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's sponsor is Private Internet Access. If you've ever surfed the web and wanted to do it securely, especially when you're traveling or using someone else's network, you definitely need private internet access. Private internet access allows you to have a secure VPN without them logging what data what you're doing, what transactions you're making, or anything like that, to connect to anywhere in the world. You can also change your default location so it appears as if you're coming from a different place. Why is this helpful, you say? If you're not doing anything nefarious, well, it's really helpful if you want to test DNS resolution from different places and different time zones. It's a really cool tool, and it's not very expensive at all. You can get plans starting at $3.99 a month, and you can find out more by going to ageekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's ageekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got Tanaka Mutakwa, and he is the VP of Engineering of Names and Faces, a Cape Town-based technology company. He's the founder of a brand called NoDaysOff, which we'll talk about for sure, and a partner in Pahari African Restaurant. Tanaka, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. I'm really excited to chat with you today, and thanks for having me on the show.
So, one of the things that I want to ask before we get started, just to lay some context, because I have guests from different backgrounds and different places all over the place. How did you get to where you are in your career journey, working as the VP of Engineering at Names and Faces and everything else that you're doing? Because you're doing a lot. So how did you get from the beginnings to where you are today?
Sure. I will try to give a brief story of my journey. So I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and got started using computers quite early on, like in primary school, not doing much coding, but more like typing, tutoring lessons and things like that. But it exposed me to computing much earlier than most people in my age range, and always enjoyed just working with computers and playing around with them, and was always good in computing classes. So naturally took that option when I went to university to study computer science. I chose computer science and moved from Zimbabwe to South Africa to study at the University of Cape Town. And I did my computer science degree there. And after leaving the University of Cape Town, I started working as a software engineer, so a full stack software engineer, mostly in web development. And I worked across various companies. So what you'd call like the usual enterprise or corporate company. I worked there. That's where I started, did about 4 years there. Then I decided to move into startups. So started working at a startup after that corporate. And yeah, I was one of the early employees there. So grew with the company. I was like the fourth software engineer there. And by the time I left, there were over 80 software engineers in that team. Wow. And that company had grown to over 200 people. And again, I was still at that time a full stack engineer, so more on the individual contributor route. But somewhere along that startup's journey, as the teams grew, they started requiring, looking out for managers, or people would be like developer managers for some of the engineering teams. And because I had been at that company from the start, and I had a lot of context, and I had helped onboard quite a number of engineers who had joined that company. And I was also always interested in the leadership space and had been reading up and researching on it and almost preparing myself for it by doing different things, which perhaps we'll talk about later in this show. Mm-hmm. And then I applied for an engineering manager role, and I got that role, and that was sort of my transition into the tech leadership space. So that would be about 7 years into my journey as an individual contributor. I transitioned into the tech leadership space, and I stayed. Okay.
Let me interrupt just real quick. What was the most difficult part of that transition? Because for some people, when you're a full stack developer like you were, you're doing all the work, and then you get into management, and you have to kind of work with people and almost scale out a little bit and give up some control of some of the things that you're working on and depend on others and delegate. What was the most difficult part of that?
Yeah, I think there's quite a number of challenges that I did face, and I think a lot of people face once you do that transition. One of them, I think, is actually the letting go of the coding. So you're so used to owning your tasks and your features and being fully involved in that coding space. And now when you're in this leadership or management role, you may still be coding depending on the company you're working at, but they're definitely not as much as you used to when that was your full focus. So just letting go of the idea that you are the critical path to solutions and features getting built is one of the things. And also sometimes defaulting to going back to doing the coding yourself as opposed to empowering the rest of the team to take over and run the coding side.
Yeah, I had the same kind of challenges when I made that transition, and having people on your team that would code things and they would do it differently. And some people that haven't come up in the software side, maybe they came up more of the infrastructure or hardware and networking sides of technology. They might not realize that there's really a creative art when it comes to developing code, and everybody does it slightly different. They have their own slant or their own dialect of code that they're going to write. They're going to do things their own way, and you'll see different algorithms or different ways someone wrote their code, and it may not be the way that you would do it. And it gets challenging sometimes as a leader to see, well, okay, you're doing it a different way, but it still works and it works great.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just that giving people that autonomy and giving them the time to craft solutions in their own way. And again, like you say, understanding that everyone is different. It's all like key lessons you start learning once you're in this management role. And I think the other thing I would mention is I also realized with coding, you get your feedback immediately. You come in the morning, you write your code, you probably get it to production that day, and like I worked on this, I did it well, or I didn't do it so well. With management, I found the feedback loop is very long, and sometimes you actually never get the answer of whether it was what you did or what you suggested that was the impact on someone else's career and whether it moved them forward or not. So you sometimes feel like you're not making progress, or you're uncertain whether you're doing well or not. So that's also tricky, especially if you're someone who's coded for many years and you always gave yourself feedback based on how you're doing day to day, and you're suddenly in a role where perhaps some of the mentoring and management you're giving someone is only going to be realized 6 months to a year from when the suggestions and the work you're doing with them.
Yeah, that's very well said. Because I know, like when you're coding, you can look at the story points if you're doing Scrum or whatever. See how many story points you're knocking off the the backlog or whatever. But you're right. As a leader, sometimes you're investing in the long game, right? You're planting little seeds that you have to wait for them to grow before you see if it actually is working, if you're doing the right thing. So that slower feedback loop is really it can be discouraging sometimes, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, again, that's another lesson that was key. I think that it was challenging, but with more time in the space, I now understand that's sort of how the leadership space is different and works when you're in those roles. Yeah, and just to sort of continue on that part, is that startup which I mentioned that obviously grown to like 80 engineers, over 200 people. Again, started feeling a little bit more of an established company or more corporate or enterprise like to me, and I was always on the lookout for what my next role would be. And with my interest in startups, as usual, being in a small company and seeing it grow, I was approached by Names and Faces, where I currently work, and they were looking for someone to be the VP of engineering and be responsible for the engineering team, and set up the team culture and processes. And yeah, that's how I interviewed with them and thought it was a good fit. And I ended up there. So I've almost been there for 2 years now. And that's how my journey sort of looks like. It starts with being an individual contributor for about 8 or so years, and then stepping into the tech leadership role, which I've been doing since then.
Awesome. Yeah. I think you really epitomize that kind of journey and that process of switching between the two, and kind of having to wear both hats at times, but also realizing that, your job now is to grow the people and not necessarily the code base. What are some of the challenges that you've seen as you've developed as a leader and through your team, and what areas do you see that you think a leader needs to focus on the most?
Yeah, so I think there's when someone becomes a new tech leader, there's a lot. It depends obviously on their background and how well prepared they were by their company into stepping up into this role. But over time, having worked in that tech leadership space, I found there are four areas which I can talk about in a bit more detail after mentioning them. There are four areas which I think, as a leader, if you narrow down and focus on and do really well at, you've almost covered the aspects that you need to be good at. So in my mind, those four areas are the people, the product, the processes of your team, and the technology stack. And just to go a little bit into detail into each one of them, people, which I mentioned first, I always put that first because I believe you can have the most talented people or the best technology stack and everything, but if you don't get the people and culture right and growing them and people being motivated and happy to work in a team and collaboration and all that, you won't go anywhere. So people is the very first and most important thing as a leader you need to focus on. Do I have the right people on my team? Am I helping them grow in their careers? Do I understand them completely? Do they trust me? Do I trust them? Do I give them enough feedback? Do they give me enough feedback? Are they collaborating and working well together? What's the company culture like? So those are all that I think is the first important aspect a leader needs to look at and needs to focus on. And it's usually the one that's most neglected. When you're coming from an individual contributor side, you're so used to you and the machine, it's you and the code. So the people side of things is very new to a lot of people. Like when a conflict occurs in a team, people usually are unable to be the facilitator and sit in the middle and address and allow conversations to continue. Even just helping someone else grow their career, most of your life you've been focusing on yourself. I'm trying to push myself. How do I grow and everything? You've never thought about how do I think of someone else and help them grow. So the people side is the first and most important thing to get right. And there are many things to do there, but I think one of the most important practices is just a regular check-in with the people reporting to you. I prefer a weekly cadence, at least 30 minutes. And in that chat, just talk about what's happened in the week for the person, how has the week been, how are they feeling about the team, anything that's stressing them out or worrying them, how's their work progressing. And also you can chat in there about short and long-term goals. But also it should be free to, if there isn't too much work things to talk about, chat about informal stuff, even what's going on at home and everything. If they had a holiday, well, how was the holiday and what they get up to? It just helps with building that rapport and trust that helps someone know that you are there and you're supporting them.
Yeah, I know those weekly one-on-ones that you're talking about and those check-ins, those are super important and valuable when it comes to building trust with the individuals, but also learning, kind of how the people operate and how to communicate with those folks. And I think, being in tech and, like you said, you're focusing on your own self for so long, and then having to switch those gears to focus on building your team, but also how to communicate with other people is really important in building that trust.
Yeah. I think the way I always tell people is, you almost treat it as if these people are your peers or your friends. How would you catch up with your friend if you had to meet your friend weekly? You would want to know what's going on in their life. How are they doing? How are they happy? What can you do to support them? And I think often it's seen as it's work. So let's only talk about work. Let's only talk about what tasks did you do this week? Did you do them well? And I think trust is built by actually getting to know someone well and properly. So I think like that's the people side. And then if we move let's go into the processes. So process is just around how does your team work? So what are the different processes that your team utilizes to work efficiently together? And in the technology industry, obviously over the last decade, the Agile methodologies have been, I think, the ones that have been winning the show in that aspect. And there are many practices and methodologies you can apply in the Agile space, whether it's Scrum, like you mentioned earlier, Kanban, extreme programming. But I think what's important as a leader is to understand what Agile is to start with, and then understand the different methodologies that are out there. What are their pros and cons, and what do they bring, so that you can look at your context as a team and what would probably work as efficient as possible. And then also always consider, is our process, always reviewing and considering if your process is still working and adapting it and adjusting it. And I think the only way you can observe and prescribe a process and ensure it's efficient is if you understand what are the different approaches in which different technology teams are working across the world, and see what your team could be using and doing. So there's a process side of which is also good to understand. And often, again, when you're an individual contributor, you kind of adopt whatever your team is using or whatever your manager has prescribed for your team. Mm-hmm. And you may not be as aware of what other approaches are out there. So that's another thing I always encourage people.
Let me ask you a question about this process. And let's say you are, I'll go back to it the way I kind of got promoted up. I was a developer on a team, kind of the lead developer. And when the manager that was on my team left, I got promoted into management, right? So we're still doing things at the time the way that we had always done them. And at the time this was, many years ago, we were using waterfall software development type methodology with the SLDC. And I decided that we're going to try Scrum, and we're going to just pull the plug, flip the switch and go Scrum and try to be an Agile shop from a waterfall shop. And we made that leap. But how is it that you've seen, when you change something like that, how do you get buy-in from the team as the new leader? How's it that you can make that shift and get everybody on your side? How do you connect that process and people together?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think what I've found is, let me start with the difficult way to do it. I think the difficult way to do it is to come in on a Monday morning and announce to your team that, listen, we're now using this new methodology. I believe it's going to work, or this is why we're doing it. Let's go.
Yeah, I can speak from experience. That's a terrible way of doing it.
Because of course, that's the buy-in you're talking about. Everyone is thinking, maybe some people already like the current method. Why are we changing? How do you know it's going to work, and everything? So what I've found, and this is something you would know, as you mentioned, in Scrum, and it's quite a common practice from the Agile space. I found retrospectives are very useful, and the usual way of facilitating a retrospective, where everyone gets to bring in their input and their opinion, and then as a unit or as a team, you all come together and agree what action items or what approaches you want to try out. So my approach would be set up a retrospective style meeting, and in that retrospective style meeting, ask people to suggest different approaches they think we could be using to improve how we currently work. Perhaps seed it with what the problem is. What's the problem we've observed? Perhaps it's taking too long for us to deliver software. We're perhaps building the wrong product because the cycle is just too long. And then let's brainstorm. And everyone brings in their input. You're also in there with them, and you bring in your input. And at the end of the day, after that session, you all vote and agree on what do we think are the best action items that have come out of here, and what do we want to try going forward into next week. And it doesn't have to be, maybe there might be 10 ideas, but perhaps you pick one and slowly try that first one, and then slowly integrate the other ones over time, because you also don't want to be a massive change overnight. But what I found is then you've brought in all the people's opinions, you've brought in consensus, and you're also all looking at the problem from one angle. So that's how I would approach it. I think a lot of problems with change and conflict around that comes from the idea that I wasn't informed or my opinion wasn't considered. Yeah. So that's why, like, the Agile retrospective is one of the best ways to to just get people to open up, and everyone gets a chance to speak and say what they want to do.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that I love the idea of a retrospective, and when you do those, like in Scrum, it's one of those processes you do at the end of your sprints, but also doing them for other tasks. I know we've had other large projects that we're from different areas of the business that didn't follow our typical processes, but doing a retrospective after that, sometimes we'll find items within that project that we want to take and we want to use it in our normal process. And it's just a great way of getting team buy-in and also getting ideas that you wouldn't come up with as yourself as a leader. You'll get things from other perspectives and other team members that are so beneficial. So I love that idea of the retrospective.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's such a universal concept, because even now at Names and Faces where I work, the sales and marketing teams and in the work they do, they're also now doing retrospectives on like how have we done this month and what can we change and adjust, because it's such a universal technique. It's not limited to software engineering. So yeah,
absolutely. So that was the first two. I think the third one you mentioned was product. You want to get into product?
Yeah, I think we can chat a bit about product. So on product, I think it's as a leader, you need to understand, for you to be as effective as possible, you need to understand the product your company is selling. Why does your company exist? Who are your customers? Why do they buy your product? How does the company make money? And you'll be surprised how many companies where people work at those companies perhaps don't know all the answers to those questions. But it's even more important as a leader, because when you go back to your team and as a technical leader, you'll be trying to decide what features to be building, how should we build them, and the cost of the technical decisions you make, and as to how they compare to the value they'll bring to the product your company makes. And also, engineers are also very creative people on the product side, so they can come up with ideas on how the business can move forward or how to make the product better. So that's why product is there. I think it's just, I believe everyone in a company, not only tech leaders and not only engineers, should have a solid understanding of how the product works and how the company makes money. But it's something that is very important for a leader to have full context and know about. So I also add that to the list of things, if someone is stepping into a leadership role, that they need to ensure they are aware of. You also often end up in meetings with non-engineering people, and you want to understand where they're coming from with the requests they bring to you. So customer support might come with a whole lot of requests that customers are bringing through, and if you don't have an understanding of the product, it'll be confusing to you why they're asking for those things. Or the sales team may ask for a feature that they believe can help solve the product, and it's easier to come to an agreement or to have consensus with them if you understand what the product is. So
yeah, I agree 100%. There was a book that I read a couple years ago called A Seat at the Table, and by Mark Schwartz, I believe it was. And in that book, he talked about how there was a transition, probably 5 or 10 years ago, where technology was kind of seen as as just a support mechanism, and we would just deliver what we were asked to deliver. If someone from the product management team or the marketing team or sales team said, "Hey, we need this," we just built it. But now we have to think like we have to understand the business as tech leaders and have a seat at that table so that we are, offering another perspective, offering input, talking about the capabilities of what is possible. So you say, "Oh, we should do this," and then you say, "Did you know that we have the technology to do even more? And let me show you what more we can do," and bring more value than just being the coder. Bring value in understanding the product and how you can improve it and enhance it going forward.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there's also a higher sense of ownership if you are involved on that on that seat at that table, and you also see that some of your ideas or your team's ideas are actually considered when you're at that table by people outside of the engineering team. So yeah, it's again the whole thing of, is my opinion being heard, and are we all working in a collaborative way versus someone made a decision in some locked, closed room and then came out and decided this is what we need to do, and we kind of don't understand why.
Yeah, agree 100%. And I think the last thing you talked about was technology stack. Can you tell me how that relates?
Yeah, so I think this one is usually the one that people immediately rush to and think is like the obvious one. Oh, you're a technology leader, so tech stack. And
Yeah.
but I think just to add to that is understanding your technology stack as a leader. There are different leaders. There's ones who are involved coding day to day with their team, so they have a bit more of a clearer view. Then there are leaders who are in different companies, perhaps are not coding at all, or further up and are not fully involved in like the day to day coding of the teams. But all of them need to understand what technology stack are we using, what are the different components that make that stack. Because to start with, that's how you get the respect from the team and the people you manage if they're able to have conversations with you where you understand each other. If a developer is struggling with a particular task because of a particular library they're trying to bring in your code base, you can empathize with them because you understand what the code base actually looks like and what issues are coming out from there. And if they're asking for input on how to make a decision, they can trust that they can come chat to you and you can both brainstorm an idea of how do we move forward with this decision, as opposed to them not being fully confident that you can help them in that aspect. And you're also able to facilitate team discussions and decisions around technology stack or expanding the technology stack, because you've got an opinion you can bring in, but also you've got an understanding of the conversations that are happening between the teammates when they're discussing. And then the other one is, again, you often be brought into meetings with non-engineering leaders where they may ask a very brief, sometimes very high-level questions on, do we think we'd be able to do that? And you are able to answer on behalf of your teams based on your knowledge of your tech stack. Perhaps you can't because maybe you need to pick up some upgrading work on your tech stack for the next 6 months, and you can't really be introducing another big feature before that, and you can explain that well to the non-engineering people. So it's really important. I think that's the part that connects you with your team and gives the people confidence that are reporting to you that they can trust you as a leader and you've got the same context. And again, like, it's always good if you are going to be in that technology space. It's fast moving and evolving, to just have a good understanding of where technology is going, else you can also become obsolete in your tech skills and understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I was recently having a conversation with a development manager who has, in my opinion, kind of lost some of that. You know, he's delegated so much and hasn't stayed on top of the changes, and his team has recently changed frameworks that they're working with, and he knows nothing about the new framework. And in talking to him about it, he's really struggling just to, for his team to see, to value his opinion anymore, because he doesn't really understand it, and he can't offer the leadership and guidance that he feels like he really needs to offer, because he doesn't know it. He didn't take the time ahead of time to learn that framework and understand it. And even not even to death, but just to be able to talk about it, intelligently.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to be the expert in every piece of software and library that your team is using, or every part of the technology stack. You just need to have enough context to have a good conversation around it and make the right decision if the decision is ever pushed up to you only, or to be able to just help guide someone make a better decision by talking to them. It does help to having been an engineer in the past, a full stack engineer, because a lot of these things do change and new libraries come out, and new frameworks, but it's usually an enhancement of something you've worked with in the past. So you have a bit of a brief understanding there. But yeah, I think that's another mistake. People easily fall into the idea that you have to be the expert in everything. Then you overwhelm yourself with going too deep into technologies, and then you end up going through the problem where you don't focus enough on the people, the process side, and the product side because you're just always in the tech. So letting go is okay, and actually empowering people to be better and to be experts, but keeping enough context to be able to have a good conversation about it and understand exactly where your team is at with that thing that they're working on.
Yeah, I know for me, there's a couple of things that I do to maintain that is in my day job, as a leader of a technology team, I may take 1 or 2 weeks worth of coding work per year to do just to keep me abreast of systems that we're working on and so on and so forth. But the real thing that I do is I take a project on the side that I'll do either for a nonprofit or for fun or whatever. Like this past year, a friend of mine was she wanted to build an app because she writes these Bible devotions for teenagers, and she's like, I want to build some way to get this out there. I said, well, I can build a website for you and an app that pulls data off the website and does daily devotions and things like that for the kids that are out there. So that was one of the projects that I just took on to, I hadn't built an iPhone app in probably 5 years. So just to go back through the process, see what's changed, what's new with the App Store, what's new with releases and how test flight works and all that good stuff that you haven't done in a while to get back into the, to understanding it so you can, again, speak intelligently when you get to that point or when your team needs you. And doing things on the side has been very helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. I think that's one of the usual suggested routes to staying up to speed with what's happening and also keeping your skills up there and kind of with the way you're doing it, still keep up with your technologies, but without interrupting your team too much because maybe you're holding on to a task that's part of the critical path and now everyone's waiting for you on it.
Yeah. That's not a good place for a leader to be.
Yeah. But yeah, I think something else I've also found is also just looking at the pull requests and the code that the team is pushing out, even if it's already gone out. A pull request may have gone out in the morning, but if you've got it open in your browser and you can read it later in the evening when you get a chance, you might not be writing that code yourself, but you've got context on what new things are coming into the code, how the code's getting written, and again, just gives you context on where your technology stack is at. So yeah, there are quite a few things that allow you to still stay up to speed there.
So one thing I noticed when I was doing my background, looking into you, is that you like to run. Can you tell me a little bit about your running past and how you got into it and why you run?
Yeah, so the running journey. So to start with, I always did quite a bit of sport in school. Mm-hmm. So I was always quite sporty. I did athletics, played cricket and rugby. So I wasn't coming from a zero base, but in school I never did like long distance running like I'm doing now, where you're running marathons and ultra marathons. How that happened was actually in about 2015. In January, beginning of the year, I'm setting New Year's resolutions as most of us do. And I decided I wanted to do 12 official races where I actually go to a race and run and get a medal at the end. Mm-hmm. As part of my fitness goals, I was like, it would be nice to do 12 races. If I do one race a month, that should be good. And what ended up happening was I went for the first weekend and went for a race that was there that first weekend, did the race. And when I was done, it felt really good to have accomplished that. And I said, I've already accomplished my first month goal in the first weekend. And when I got back home, I thought to myself, is there another race next weekend? Because if I can do another race next weekend, that's kind of like 2 months knocked out of the way. And it's so early, then I'm on good course with my New Year's resolution. So I ended up at another race the next weekend. And before you know it, I'm doing races almost every weekend because I'm now enjoying it. And I've quickly gone past that 12 races in a year by like the third month or fourth month of the year. And that's how I sort of just got into running and enjoyed the idea of waking up on a weekend and meeting up with people and doing an official race. But those were just sort of casual I would wake up, do a race. I wasn't really training for marathons or like ultra marathons. But eventually, after you're sort of running that frequently, you start to wonder, could I do a marathon? And if I wanted to do it, what do I need to do? So that's when I started training a bit with people who are a bit more experienced runners, and they helped me prepare properly for races like marathons, where you actually train during the week and then do longer runs on weekends. And then I started doing marathons, and eventually also started doing a couple of ultra marathons. And I've just embraced the running journey. So it started off more for New Year's resolutions, more of an enjoying the being out there and running with people on a weekend. And then now it's become almost a lifestyle habit that I enjoy to keep fit, and just the challenges. I think there's many lessons from running that translate back to life, with starting something and making sure you finish it, even though you may struggle somewhere in the middle. Consistency, you only really get better in running with being consistent. A lot of running for long distance training is you actually need to run slower than your fastest pace in training, so that you don't burn yourself out. And that again translates a lot to life. You don't always have to be moving at fast forward with everything. Some things just need to be done gradually, and you get there. And I really enjoy the long training runs because it takes me out of. I run without any earphones or music, so I'm digital free, and it feels like it's myself and my mind just relaxing and thinking about things. And you're also outdoors. In modern day, you can easily just be stuck indoors with like all these electronics and digital stuff, and your brain is always like, oh, I'm in social media or everything. And I think that just a long run, 2 or 3 hour run, takes me out of that and allows me to feel much better. There's lots of even coding problems and solutions, or trying to write an article or something, where I go for a long run, and when I come back, I've solved half of that during the run. That unconscious way of solving problems that people often talk about happening to them while they're showering. Also happens when you're doing a fitness event that just unlocks your mind and relaxes you. So there's lots of benefits, and that's how my running journey has started, and the benefits it's given me back in my life in general.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have to say, very similar for me too. I know when I was training for my first marathon, it was those long runs. I would feel like I solved so many problems in my head when I got back, and you would always have. I don't know if it was the endorphins or just getting your mind away from a screen and code or whatever, but then it just seemed to be able to, after 3 or 4 or 5 miles in, you start your brain just starts working differently, and you start seeing something and it'll trigger a thought. You'll see a bird flying over here and it'll trigger a thought about something totally different that will get your brain going. And I don't know, for me, I think it may have been my mind just trying to get away from the pain of running. But another thing for me, I noticed that if I signed up for the race, the official race, I would feel more committed to doing the running. Like, I went through a period of time where I didn't sign up for anything and didn't do any races, and my running really dropped off. Like, I wouldn't work as hard. I would skip days here and there, or when I did go for a run, it would never be at the pace that I should have been really training for. It would always drop down. But if I signed up for a race, it just triggered something in my brain that says, oh, okay, I got a race coming up. I'm going to do it now. So I found that was one of those things that was important for me to continue. It was to sign up for that race.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's there's a couple of those tactics that do something to the brain that motivates it to keep going. Like, sign up for the race, and then if you make the commitment a bit more public, so you've told your friends that I signed up for that race, then everyone's sort of waiting to hear how did the race go. It almost creates in your mind that you have to do it.
Absolutely. Yep.
And even with training runs, sometimes doing them with people where you agree that we are going to run together on Saturday morning to train, you feel dependent they're dependent on you to show up. So you can't now keep lying down in bed when someone else is woken up early and is waiting for you.
Right.
So
you don't want to let them down.
These little tactics that funny enough are so small, but create an environment which allows you to be better. And again, like when we talk of those things, some of them translate back to even work and how a team works and how people want to be better, because if you're writing your code, it's now the team's code. It's a shared code base, and you don't want to let the team down. And you've committed to building a feature together. Let's do it together. Let's get it out. There's so many parallels that come from sport into life. So I'm quite a big fan of looking at how some things are done in sport and how they come back to work and our lives in general.
Absolutely. Yep, I agree 100%. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people find out more about the things that you're working on, names and faces, and NoDaysOff and things like that?
Yeah, so I think with names and faces, just to mention that the startup I work at, we build a visual employee directory for companies, so people can know who's who at their company and where they fit in. We typically solve the problem for companies that are growing past 50 people, where you're not so sure who else is working at your company and what they're doing, and it starts becoming embarrassing when you walk into the canteen or something and you see someone who you should know, but you don't even know their name and what they do. And also now in a more remote context where you actually work with people who you've never met. So our app your company will buy our app or subscribe to our application, and we will build a directory of all your people, and it's visual, so you can identify people by their faces in a nice, clean way, and it's very fast. And allows you to contact them very, very quickly if you need access to them. And that, if you want to get more detail around that, you can just go to namesandfaces.com, and you can watch the video that shows what we're doing, or just read up on that. And then everything else around myself, you can find me on LinkedIn through my name, so Tanaka Mutakwa, or I'm also on Twitter. You can search for my name, or you can search for my handle, General Mutakwa. And from there, I link out to a lot of the different things I'm doing. So one of those platforms, LinkedIn or Twitter, should take you to find out more information about me.
Awesome. And I'll link all that up in the show notes at geekleader.com. And thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, John. It's been a very good conversation, and all the best with the future episodes of the show.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.